Rose. It's great to have you on Undercurrent.
Thanks for having me, Gabe.
Yeah,
great
thanks
to
for
be
being
here.
I've admired your work for so long and just so appreciated you as a young leader stepping into a volatile issue and a topic and having such boldness and courage in how you addressed it. And for those who haven't followed along with your work, will you just give everybody a little scope into this journey you've been on, when this started for you, your focus on the life issue, and where you sit today? Just give us a couple minutes on catching up on your life.
Of course. And thank you for all that you're doing. It's so wonderful and impactful, Gabe. And
thank you.
I'm excited to do this with you. So Live Action is my organization. Started it as a teenager. It was born out of really a broken heart. I found out about abortion as a younger kid, and I'm one of 8 children. My family was automatically very pro-life, and that my parents had 8 kids. They weren't like pro-life activists, but they were pro-life. And then when I found out about abortion, it was by reading this book, and I was so deeply moved by the fact that at the time there were 3,000 abortions every single day. This was legal in America, and these were human beings. These were, I'd seen the ultrasound picture growing up on our refrigerator of my, upcoming brother or sister, my next sibling. This is a life. Science is clear. These are human lives. And when I discovered that abortion was legal, children were being killed even miles from where I was raised at a Planned Parenthood abortion clinic, I thought this is the human rights issue of our day. And so I felt this broken heart and this calling from God to do something about it. Started Live Action as a 15-year-old in my parents' living room, and it's really just been a journey that I would not have predicted. I mean, really, I believe is God. When anything good happens, that's God at work there, of just taking the next right step, and how can we make more of an impact to save lives and to change hearts and minds. Because here's the thing, a lot of people just don't know the truth about the value of life, about the reality of abortion. And I do think our country and our world can dramatically change on these issues if we have the opportunity to see the truth about what abortion actually is, to hear the case for life, and to be given that message in a bold and unapologetic way, but in a loving way. And so that's really defined the trajectory of Live Action, is winsome, bold, unapologetic communication, especially to younger generations, to change hearts and minds on abortion.
Well, it's incredible, your story. I mean, to think at 15 years old, which, if we go back to when you were 15, this abortion issue was, it was just one that not a lot of people wanted to engage. It was almost like people in the Christian community were doing things, but you came along to say, I'm going to just take it on, head on, as a young woman. And it really, just your posture and your position as a young woman to say, hey, this can't keep happening, I think just captured the imagination of so many people. And now today Live Action reaches, I know, over 75 million people are listening to the podcast, are watching the video series, are following along, because your journey continues now. What was it like when you saw Roe v. Wade hit this moment where people thought the impossible, this would never happen, that the Supreme Court would have a ruling like this that would change at least where this was going to be decided, moving it back to the states? What was that moment like for you?
It was amazingly encouraging to see, the decision that was responsible for over 60 million deaths. Because the reality is, when Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, virtually every state had laws against abortion. Abortion was illegal virtually in every state. And when Roe v. Wade was decided by unelected justices, they basically decided for the country that everywhere abortion should be available. And so within just a few years, the abortion rate spiked dramatically. There were then soon millions of abortions that were happening, children's lives that were lost, and also there's the walking wounded, women who are hurt by abortion, men who are hurt by abortion. So when Roe v. Wade was overturned just a couple years ago, we're going on 3 years now, it was electrifying for the movement. Now finally, pro-life laws in pro-life states could actually protect babies. And since the overturn of Roe v. Wade, there have been over 40,000 children that we know of that have been born, that have lived, because of pro-life laws protecting their right to live, their right to exist. So that's hugely powerful. But as you know, I'm sure you follow this, the battle is on. The pro-abortion side is extremely energized. There's a ton of misinformation, quite frankly, out there that is scaring a lot of people, saying pro-life states are not helping women, they're not providing health care. A lot of misinformation that's just simply not true. And so really our work is more important than ever to change hearts and minds, and also to say, listen, this is not about just states' rights. Some people are like, abortion is now in the states, that's where it belongs. Abortion is a human rights abuse. every human being has a right to life. That's not a states' rights issue. That's a human life, human rights issue. So states actually have the responsibility to protect babies in the womb. They don't get to decide, oh, some babies will live or die based on how we decide. These are fundamental human rights. So that's something we also have to educate on, because some people are saying, oh, the battle's over. We're done. And it's like, no, we're just getting started. And these children, they deserve protection, whether they're in California or Florida. Everywhere a child is, and wherever they're conceived, they deserve legal protection.
Well, I know for you it was encouraging, but you're following this so closely to see the reaction and the vitriol from the pro-choice movement that happened in the face of this ruling. I think for a lot of people was shocking, because I think people thought, oh, this has been ruled on, the pro-life movement's gaining momentum. But like you said, there's been an uptick in not only the voice of sort of this pro-choice movement that might be surprising to some people, how much this is so core to a woman's identity to fight for this, but also the creative ways in which, through taking pills now and through finding new ways to essentially give people the option to kill children, that movement seems to be picking up speed. Can you just kind of catch us up on the new ways, the new methods in which abortion is still taking place in kind of creative ways that are working around some of the rulings that have taken place?
It's a really good question, and it's a lot of people maybe aren't aware of what's happened even in just the last few years. So when Biden was president, he did something called lifting the REMS requirement, or the REMS regulations, which basically say you can't send drugs via mail, the post-mail system, that are abortion drugs. And if you're going to take an abortion drug, you need to at least have one in-person visit with a physician to ensure, a nurse, to ensure that you are actually pregnant, to ensure that the baby is actually in the womb. It's not an ectopic pregnancy, because if you take the abortion drug, you have an ectopic pregnancy. It can actually be life-threatening for you, because a baby in an ectopic pregnancy cannot be miscarried the way that a baby in a womb, who's actually in the womb, is going to be aborted. So obviously the whole thing's horrible, because we shouldn't have lethal drugs on the market that kill babies, period. But what Biden did during COVID was say, okay, just send the drugs via the mail, no in-person appointment needed. So now over 60% of abortions are these abortion drugs that are sent via our mail. Basically anybody can order them. 14-year-olds could order them. Sexual abuser of a young person could order them. People can stock up on them. They're everywhere. And if you're a pro-life state like Texas, you have laws to protect children. There's nothing that you can do to prevent all of these drugs from pouring into your state. So this is a huge issue, and I think that there's a solution. You can pull the drug from the market. You can put back in regulation. So there's a lot of things the Trump administration could do. But like you were saying, in addition, there's just been literally hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent on pro-abortion. I would call it propaganda. People saying women are going to die without abortion. It's not true. Abortion is not medically necessary. You can do an early delivery in a severe medical emergency of the baby, but you don't have to target the baby's body for destruction and kill the baby. This is not my opinion. It's thousands of medical professionals. So there's a lot of evidence that shows pro-life laws are healthy for baby and mom. Regardless, the pro-abortion lobby is very powerful. They're well-funded. Planned Parenthood, this is crazy. Planned Parenthood got $700 million from taxpayers in the last recorded year. So
$700 million.
And they're the biggest abortion chain, the biggest propagandist of the pro-abortion. So they're just using that money to double down on the lies that they're telling. Pro-life organizations are not getting any money, from the government, obviously, including pregnancy centers. So all this to say, there's a lot of work to do. But I'm hopeful, because I do see when people know the truth, their minds change on this issue. Right. And there's a lot of amazing momentum in the movement right now.
We're seeing so many young people speak up, start to use their voice, gain confidence. And a lot of that's been due to storytelling that you've been doing. And I know you've seen the impact of creating a new imagination for people around a topic like this and actually doing the storytelling. And you're reaching millions and millions of people through that. Describe a little bit about the communication strategy and why this is so important in an issue like this that can be confusing, and at kind of even the conversational level amongst peers, even for young people, it's hard for them to talk about it. They don't want to necessarily debate their friends on issues on campus. You're creating some new ways for people to imagine and think. So talk about that strategy, why that's so important now.
That's such a good question, because I do think, like you're saying, storytelling is essential for any cause or for any initiative where you're trying to capture people's imaginations, persuade them of anything. And with the pro-life issue, we have the most incredible stories. I mean, the story of any mother who heroically chooses life for her baby because she's facing maybe, being a single mother, but she still chooses life, or she's facing economic challenges, but she still chooses life, or God forbid she suffered sexual violence and was the victim of the survivor of rape and she chooses life for her baby. That's a hero story. That's inspiring. That's incredible. There are so many people like Steve Jobs, as an example. He was adopted. The stories of adoptees who were, rose above survived the odds and who show the incredible gift of just one life and the impact one life can have, right? And then you tell the stories of abortion survivors, some of these heavier stories. Melissa Ohden or Gianna Jessen, and we tell these stories all the time through our different media efforts. They were both victims of abortion. They were literally, the doctor tried to kill them. They miraculously survived. They were born before the doctor could complete the abortion. And by God's grace, a nurse rescued them. Because sometimes these babies born alive during failed abortions, they're just left to die or killed after birth. These women, they were rescued. So they're going around the country, and we tell their stories all the time, saying, where were my rights? What were my rights? They tried to kill me, I survived. What about the other children like me? So we have so much power on our side to tell these stories. And when you grow up in kind of like a pro-choice culture, which I did, we all grew up, in a post-Roe culture where everybody was it was baked in: pro-choice, women's reproductive rights. These were the words that were thrown around. Of course you support abortion. If you love women, you want to flip the script on that. Of course you reject abortion if you loved women. Abortion is an assault on women as much as it's a destruction of a baby. I mean, you have to flip the script on this stuff and then tell the stories also about women harmed by abortion. Those are other stories to tell. So the more we tell these stories, I think the more people's eyes can be opened.
Yeah, I love the approach you've taken, which is not to just treat this like a political issue, but to make it the premier human rights issue. Because I think when people have to recognize this child is a life.
Yes.
This child deserves these rights.
Yeah.
And the science seems to be helping a lot, right? The science and the ability to start to see when a child's life begins, the technology now that allows people to experience that or hear a heartbeat. I mean, those things have made a big difference in a mother being able to imagine, this is a life. This life does have a human right. As you look around the globe, I know the U.S. has been a big exporter of this ideology, right? We've tried to help more and more nations see this as a important part of a woman's rights versus the child's rights. What are you seeing at the global level in terms of how certain nations are responding? Does it seem to be they're all in lockstep, or are you seeing certain nations push back and create more space for human rights for these children?
It's a really good question. I mean, a lot of Latin America is very pro-life, like Chile as an example.
Yeah.
Argentina, has been super pro-life. We exported a lot of activism, pro-abortion activism, into Argentina. So this was just recently, in the last few years, they passed a law to allow some abortions after aggressive Western export influence of the abortion agenda. So what I'm trying to say here is that there's a war in many of these countries, especially parts of Latin America, certainly parts of Africa, where America is aggressively exporting abortion.
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions of dollars being exported to push for the abortion regime, this ideology that says, of course you need abortion, you're backwards people. And it's so ironic too, because a place like Chile, there have been years where Chile has better maternal mortality rates, meaning less women dying from pregnancy, than America.
Wow.
And they're more pro-life than we are. And
Yeah.
so we have this very backward thinking that if you have more abortion, you're going to be healthy, and that's completely false.
Yeah.
Ireland is another example. They had some of the lowest maternal mortality rates in the world, but when they used to be a pro-life country. And then tragically in the last decade, abortion activists flooded the country from the US, from Britain, from other pro-abortion countries, and they now permit abortion in Ireland. So in some of these states, some of these countries, we're seeing losses where
Wow.
because of abortion ideology export, the countries are becoming more pro-abortion, but some are standing strong. I mean, Malta, as an example, one of the only European countries, 100% pro-life. Again, extremely great maternal mortality rates compared to countries like the
Yeah.
US. Like they do a great job with healthcare for mothers. So it's a fight.
Yeah.
I am encouraged, Gabe, because under the Trump administration, and again, there have been some wins already, he is cutting some of this money that is going to fund abortion overseas and abortion activism. So that is a step in the right direction.
Yeah. The United Nations has put out there for decades, probably since you were 15, their vision of a world where there are now called SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. 2030 is kind of this big marker. And they always frame these things as they're trying to help human beings have a flourishing life. So the language is written beautifully. So you'd almost be convinced that every one of these goals is great for humanity. But in the weeds of these things are ideas around population control, around the fact that the environment or the climate can't sustain itself if we have more people on this earth. And there's this movement towards depopulation, or essentially, we've heard Bill Gates talk about this and many others, but the idea of providing good health care will mean we have less people in the world, which does not pass the sniff test. You're kind of like, what are you talking about? But as you look at those kinds of goals, the way these goals are framed, the way populations in other countries are being controlled, when we hear terms like population control, should our radar be up? and what are some of the ways that this is subtly maybe crept into Christian communities or to the church or religious communities that find themselves supporting these things, that they feel like it's compassionate? But maybe if we were to go a little bit deeper underneath this, we would understand, no, we actually might be doing way more harm to family structure, to mothers, to children.
Listen, overpopulation is a complete myth. In the West, we're not even replacing ourselves as populations, meaning if we continue on this path, we can go extinct. In the US, and in any country, you need to have at least 2.1 children per couple just to replace the population. And by the way, this is important for social, economic, and endless reasons, the replacement of a population. I don't need to get into that, but basically if you want to have an economic future for any country, you need to at least replace your population, and ideally you're growing it. But in the West, we are in a population winter, meaning we're not replacing ourselves. People are having no kids, or they're just having one kid, or some people maybe just have 2 kids. It's very rare to see families with 3, 4, 5, 6 plus kids. And that's because there's a huge social pressure to say, that's weird. Why would you have more than 1 or 2? You have your boy, you have your girl, you're done. Countries like China had literally the one-child policy, where they would force abortions on women who would have a second baby. I mean, there's horrible stories out of China. Now, because of population winter in China, they're flipping that, and they're actually incentivizing people to have more than 1 child, because they realize, what have we gotten ourselves into? There's a tremendous population imbalance now. We don't have an economic future if we continue on this path. So I think that's one of the biggest myths today, that population is actually shrinking, that this can lead to social and economic collapse, and that the solution is to have a positive attitude about kids. And to say children are a blessing. A human being is always a gift. And you look at the history of population controllers, like, from the 18th century and beyond, people saying we're going to run out of food, we're going to run out of energy. Guess what? The more human beings we've had, the more we have invented new ways to produce food, to produce energy, to produce shelter, to produce commercial goods. And now we are the richest as a population across the globe than we have ever been. It's very encouraging. I mean, the lack of people suffering malnourishment, hunger has dropped dramatically over the last 50, 100 years because of these advances, even with the population overall growing. So we need to have a positive attitude about human beings, and we need to celebrate new life as our greatest resource instead of seeing children as this threat that we need to destroy.
Yeah, the fertility crisis is very real. I think in the U.S. we're at 1.6 right now. I've heard some reports of even lower than that if you look at the most recent data, which means we're not even close to replacement rate. Talk a little bit about what's happening with the fertility crisis, and give us some of your insights. It seems like there's a lot of reasons this could be happening, from toxic environmental situations to stress, anxiety. But what are you learning about that, and what are your encouragements to people who are maybe experiencing this, or maybe they're young, they're college students and they're questioning whether they should get married or wait till they're 30 and have their career established? I mean, some of those narratives that we've really bought into, what are some of the ways that you would encourage people around making sure we can actually reproduce at least at the current rate, 2.1?
I mean, it's tough. Look, just to be very clear, I mean, 1 million abortions a year right now in America. If we didn't kill our babies, we would not have a population crisis that we face right now. So now, that being said, the reality is abortions largely are happening with single women, women who are not married. And that's another crisis that we don't really talk about. It's kind of uncomfortable to talk about. Some Christians sometimes talk about it, but it's the fact that sex belongs in marriage. And when you take sex outside of marriage, you create a whole host of problems for our society. And that's what we're seeing right now with the abortion problem. And honestly, a lot of the relationship troubles, the unhappiness, the dissatisfaction, obviously the rise in sexually transmitted infections, all of this stuff, it's because sex is not in marriage right now culturally. People are like expected to hook up, shack up before marriage. It's like the cultural expectation. Virginity is mocked and looked down on. Second virginity is seen as stupid. That's such a disservice, I think, to the dignity of men and women. And I don't think, we have self-control when we go to the gym, self-control with our diet, self-control with work hard at your job. Of course we should have self-control with something as incredibly important and beautiful as sexual intimacy. And it deserves to be had with the person that you've committed to for life, AKA a marriage, who loves you and respects you. So I think that message is really important. There's so many factors, like you were saying, infertility. A lot of, good couples that are married are struggling now with infertility. Part of that is many people are not getting married till they're, later in life, or because they've been on birth control, or, tragically they've had abortions in their history. Those things can injure fertility. So there's a lot of things that are injuring our fertility. Certainly environmental factors. We don't know the whole effect of them, but I'm sure there's research emerging about plastics and, our water supply. It's bad out there, right? Yeah. So I think the general posture, especially of people of goodwill and faith, should be to encourage marriage, to encourage, growth of individuals to be the best spouses they can be, and to celebrate, I think, chastity, that sex belongs in marriage, and also to encourage fertility awareness, to get to know our own bodies, including as women. A lot of women don't even understand their cycles. They don't even understand how to be healthy with that kind of sixth vital sign of their period. They're told to just go on birth control at young ages. That whole system is messed up.
Well, it seems like birth control, there's been way more exposure now. I just remember 3 decades ago, it was just so normative for everybody to say, well, go on birth control if you don't want to have children. Now, Catholics were arguably the ones always saying, no, don't do birth control. But it's only seemed like recently when the fallout of birth control and what it's doing to women's bodies and how it's impacting all of this reproductive process is coming out, which it's good to get it exposed, but I think there's probably a lot of people who've went down that path unknowingly, and now they're like, what do I do?
Right. Well, and it's tough, and I think the best thing is prevention, saying don't do it. Yeah. Good friends don't tell their friends not to go on birth control because it's bad in more ways than one. And then there also is a trend in some Christian circles where men are getting vasectomies. And I think that's another really tragic thing of just shutting down this incredible power that they have to bring life into the world instead of working with the fertility of their bodies. So I think there's certain trends that we have to just combat and be open about and talk about and say, listen, fertility is a gift from God. Yeah. That doesn't mean you just have endless babies as quickly as you can, but it means you see life, generally speaking, as a gift, and that you're generous in saying yes to that gift from God.
Let's talk more about that, because the Catholic, Protestant, evangelical divide on that, I think, was pretty enormous over the last few decades, where the Catholic Church has said, we value life, and you many times see large families and they're Catholic, and it's sort of just this understanding that they're not going to use birth control. But in a lot of Protestant evangelical spaces, that became very normative. But would you just describe a little more on that theology, this idea of what you just said, that life is a gift, us trying to control how many children we have? How do you think about the boundaries of that? How does the Catholic Church instruct on that so we can all benefit from some of the wisdom there?
Totally. And my quick history on this is I wasn't raised Catholic. I actually ended up becoming Catholic in college. And this actually teaching about it resonated with me very deeply, because it didn't seem like it was theological, but it was very philosophical. It's like anybody can see this if they look at the natural order of the universe and the human body. But basically, sex is designed for two things. It can bond people together in an incredibly intense way, right? It's this incredibly beautiful thing you can do with someone you love. And then it can bring life into the world. So there's the unitive and the procreative. And that's God's design. It's the natural design of the sexual act. So if there's any time in the sexual act where you sever one of those things, God forbid you don't have the unitive, you don't treat the person lovingly. You don't want to help them have pleasure and unity. You don't actually commit to them for life. You're just using them for your sexual pleasure. Then that's breaking the natural order, and it's immoral. Similarly, the procreative. Not every sexual act is procreative. A woman can only get pregnant a few days a month. But if you intentionally sever the procreative act of sex, where you create an artificial barrier, birth control as an example, a man intentionally hurts his body, gets a vasectomy, you're intentionally severing the procreative act. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't space children or even delay having children because there's some significant reason. You can work with the natural cycles of the man and the woman's body and delay or space children. But to intentionally put a barrier in there to separate either the unitive or the procreative act breaks down the moral order of sex. And there's a lot of consequences for it, which we could get into, but we're living with the consequences of a society that has totally destroyed the unitive and the procreative aspects of sex and completely severed them.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks for describing that more. As you look at the next few years, are there some things that you're hopeful as states take on new laws, policies? Are there models that you're looking at that you're saying, hey, these are some of the most innovative ways we're seeing people approach this in the midst of a dynamic where there's going to be a lot of disagreement around it? What are some of those pathways you're seeing that are working or that you're trying to encourage your 75 million followers to push?
Yeah. Well, we're really excited about a few things legislatively. Our Baby Olivia bills. So Baby Olivia is this, best-in-class, lifelike, medically accurate visualization, animation of life developing in the womb, the scientific journey of life's beginnings. Really beautiful. We have her in public school curricula in 2 different states now, and it's being introduced in several other states this year. So that's really key, I think, for a pro-life country. People know what life looks like in the womb, and it's seen as a beautiful thing from a young age. It's very natural,
so this
good.
Is taught in high school curriculums,
and it can be taught in as young as kindergarten, depending on what's age appropriate, but like showing life's beginnings, in a very beautiful, positive way. So that's one thing. We obviously need to pass legal protections for the baby. There is a law in Congress that's been introduced, the Life at Conception Act, just to acknowledge life begins at conception. It doesn't begin at birth. It doesn't begin at 20 weeks. It begins, the science is clear, begins at the moment of fertilization. A unique single-cell embryo comes into existence. So we should have a law that acknowledges that, and so these babies deserve protection. So that's another thing. And the last thing I would just say is, pro-family policies, because we were talking about how hard it is, families struggling to get pregnant, and just there's a lot of chaos right now. But having more policies where, if you're having kids, you should get major, not just tax credits, you should get a cash subsidy. I mean, imagine if we gave mothers in the first year, instead of as part of paid family leave, instead of a daycare credit, so there's plans for make daycare universally free. Instead of making the poor mother who just had her baby drop her baby off at daycare so she can go work in an office, why don't we just give that money to the mother so she can stay at home with her baby and enjoy that, life-changing bonding with her baby and give that money back to her family, right? So I think having pro-family policies that encourage family unity and support families having kids, I think that's the future.
I know a lot of the conversations now around ethics and trying to apply a Christian worldview to babies is coming around this in vitro fertilization, IVF discussion, designer babies. There's new technologies now that are even suggesting at some point life could be created outside of a womb in artificial wombs that would essentially help a child come into life. I mean, these are wild dystopian thoughts about the future where it starts to disconnect couples in the procreative way from a child.
Right.
Talk about IVF. This is an area that I know any of my friends who are in this space, they say, don't bring up IVF. Everybody will be unhappy. No one will end happy with that conversation because we all have friends who are using that process or have to conceive children. It's obviously feels like a good advancement in technology to have options when you are infertile. But what are some of the cautions around IVF and what are some of the ethical issues that we're now starting to have bigger conversations about?
Right. Well, and again, like any baby that is here, any human being that's been conceived via IVF and is walking among us, incredible gift from God, right? Oh. So that's always, we have to take that into account with this conversation. And also infertility sucks. It's really hard and painful for people that are struggling with it. So you can understand the temptation to want to do IVF because this is their maybe path to be able to get the baby that they're so longing for. All of that being said, it kind of goes back to what I was saying originally, which is there's a natural order for sex, procreative and the unitive. And when you take out the unitive, so basically IVF is creating babies without sex, right? Yeah. And then you can have sex without babies, where you like abort the baby or you prevent the baby via contraception. But IVF is kind of the opposite issue of you're creating the baby without sex. It does open the door to a lot of abuses and harm, and we're seeing that, unfortunately, because God's natural order provides natural safeguards. We know that. We know that the 10 Commandments were given to us with natural safeguards for human flourishing, similar with any morality around sex or family or relationships. And when it comes to IVF, the reality is this: it's less than 10% of the babies conceived via IVF make it out alive. Most of them are either frozen indefinitely. There's 1 million babies minimum in deep freeze right now in the US. Or they end up getting aborted, destroyed, because they were selected as not wanted or desirable, inconvenient, or they're not good enough. They're selected as they're not good enough. And we've gotten so callous by looking at these embryos. They're human lives. They're human beings, little boys or girls, God's children. And we see them now as property. So it's like, if I don't want them, I can freeze them, I can discard them, I'll implant 1, implant 2, and we're treating them like property. And so the reality is IVF is wrong because it treats human beings like property. It's extremely dangerous for these babies, and it breaks this moral order for sex and for children. In addition to that, I think it's important to say that there are solutions. There is restorative reproductive technologies that work within the natural biological systems of the man and the woman to help them improve their health with their fertility and their bodies. And those approaches, which are not well known, many Christians aren't even aware of all of the things you can do using restorative reproductive technologies that are ethical, that don't have this issue of babies in deep freeze, babies discarded, and those have as good success rates as IVF.
Wow, that's
but
great.
People don't know this. A lot of people, they have infertility for a year or 2 and they go to IVF. They're never exploring the amazing restorative reproductive technologies. And part of the problem is there's not enough doctors doing it. So we need more doctors doing it, but we need to spread awareness about these technologies.
Well, we'll link in the show notes so people can learn more about that topic. I'm not aware of it, so I'd love to help more and more people engage that conversation and hopefully inspire some more doctors to take this on and to understand that this is a pathway for them. A final thought, at 15, you were, you didn't know what was ahead of you. You didn't know this would end up being your life work and mission. But to other teenagers sitting out there today who feel like, I'm too young, I can't make a difference, I'm burdened about something, I feel God putting something in my heart that I want to go after, I don't know where to start. What would you say to that teenager right now to encourage them in that journey?
I mean, I wrote a book where I literally had a chapter called Just Start.
Yeah.
Which is, if you feel a burden, if you feel a calling, you're not sure fully what it's supposed to look like, the action is powerful. You can say a prayer, God help me, God use me, and you take the next right step. And that can look like, if you're feeling burdened about something, calling someone else that cares and asking them, how are you getting involved? Or if you're in a church community, is there any kind of ministry related to this? If not, can we do some sort of a project as a church? Get involved with other people. There's power in community, right? Yeah. But just taking a next right step. And the path is never going to be clear. You look at the stories of anyone, I'm sure your story, Gabe, certainly mine, there's also kinds of twists and turns. Like, you don't have this clear exact vision of how it's going to look and you just get out. God gives us the next right step, and he wants you to be faithful and have a little bit of courage and just go for it. Yeah. And so that would be my encouragement.
That's great, Lila. Well, thank you for taking time to help us better understand the life issue, but also these other conversations I know that in the coming years are going to be really important for leaders to understand, and we're going to keep following your story and supporting the work that you do. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gabe. Thanks for everything that you do.